Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get the afternoon workshop going. I would like to open up and begin the afternoon workshop that's on community and economic development and housing and redevelopment authority levy. So what we're going to do first is start off with introductions. I am Representative Rena Moran.
Former.
I am Commissioner Rena Moran, District 4.
Mary Jo McGuire, Commissioner District 2.
Nicole Bredem, Commissioner District 1.
Victoria Reinhardt, Commissioner District 7.
Mai Chong Zhang, Commissioner for District 6. Trista Mattis Castillo, District 3.
Max Holderson, Manager of Housing Development and Programs in CED.
Josh Olson in Community Economic Development.
Carrie Collins, Community and Economic Development.
Joanna Berg, Deputy County Manager.
Ryan O'Connor, County Manager.
Yes.
Jared Gomez, Multifamily Development Specialist, CED. Ella Mitchell. Chang Chi Clark. Portia Jackson, CED. Heather Costume.
Matt Hill with Commissioner McGuire's office.
Amy Wadsworth, Commissioner.
All right, I want to thank you, everyone, for being here today, and I'm going to just hand this over to Joanna Burge.
Oh, we're delighted to be here today, and I'll quickly turn it over to Carrie to walk through our update.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. This is the long-awaited recap of the 2022 HRA levy. However, we will walk through kind of how the year went, the degree of spend, geographic disbursement, but then we'll also talk about the American Rescue Plan Act, how that went over the course of the year, and next steps associated with those investments. And then talk a little bit about the Community Development Block Grant, as well as the CDBG CV, which was kind of a unique federal program, additional funding source that came out of the COVID-19 crisis. Then we'll talk a little bit about what we can expect in 2023, which is slightly humorous because we are well into 2023, but good things to come. With me at the table, again, I'm Carrie Collins, Josh, Max, and then Peyupua is the mastermind behind a lot of the data sets here, and so she may join us if there's specific questions about the bar graphs and the data that we're about to show. So a little bit about the HRA levy background. So in 2021, Ramsey County Board had a directive to recommended action of the Economic Inclusion Plan that said we need to activate this HRA levy. We are limited in terms of the resources to fund deeply affordable housing infrastructure. At that time, ARPA, we were right on the cusp of ARPA allocations, and so we needed a steady, reliable annual resource. So at that time, we did activate the Ramsey County Housing and Redevelopment Authority levy. In 2021, we got the approvals for 2022. As we know, the City of St. Paul and North St. Paul were the two communities that needed to pass a resolution opting in. St. Paul did that. North St. Paul did not. They chose not to participate at that time. However, this evening, we will be returning to the North St. Paul City Council meeting upon their request to provide a presentation about how the first year went, and with possibility of considering joining the Ramsey County HRA for year 2024. So an exciting time, and I think they'll be pretty pleased with kind of the degree of spend, maybe. And so we, as described, investment in housing infrastructure has been our priority. You'll see that across all of our funding sources, even when it comes to our Environmental Response Fund and other funding sources. We've been saying internally, all roads lead to housing. So that has been our priority. Programming has been flexible to meet the community needs. You've seen programmatic changes over time. You'll hear a little bit more about that today. And you'll recall we moved some of the programs, like our DPA program, out from underneath kind of the restrictive lens of the HUD funding, like the home program, and put that under the HRA levy to free up flexibility to serve more residents. And so you'll kind of see, did we achieve the desired result as it pertains to that particular change?
DPA standing for?
Down payment assistance.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to, did I hear that right?
And our spending plan has functioned as a roadmap, and it really overlaps with that of other funding sources so that we're continuing to drive deeply affordable housing infrastructure, but also so that it allows us to provide funds and invest in projects across the county in a really unique way. However, you'll recall at the time that St. Paul passed a resolution, and certainly what we're hearing out of suburban communities was a desire for us to spend the HRA levy with 50-50. So 50% of the HRA levy, they desired to be returned to suburban Ramsey County, 50% of the levy to be returned back to the city of St. Paul. So we've got some metrics on that today as well. And then as we were going around having conversations with North St. Paul, City of St. Paul, and that of other communities, we did say, you know, it was asked quite a bit, how much is going to be used for staff? How much is going to be used for overhead? And at that time, we committed 10% of the levy will, you know, not more than 10% will be used for staff. The goal is to get funds into the hands of projects that are supporting multifamily housing infrastructure and wealth generation initiatives. So that has been our commitment, and we'll continue to kind of drive around that percentage with each budget going forward. Here is a graphic that kind of identifies the kind of geographic kind of restrictions of our funding programs. CDBG and Home, as you know, is restricted to the suburbs, and that's because the City of St. Paul, based off the formula, gets their own allocation to St. Paul. And the Environmental Response Fund is a county-wide program available to all communities, including North St. Paul. The HRA levy is almost county-wide, with the exception of the City of North St. Paul. You can see that little carve-out there. And then, of course, our ARPA funds were county-wide. And with the goal with the HRA levy and the IRF being parity between suburban Ramsey County and the City of St. Paul. So, Josh, this is your slide that talks about the degree of.
Can we pause for a moment,
Yes.
Manager?
Thanks, Madam Chair. After saying whole questions till the end, right? She asked me about today. On the North St. Paul question, though, specifically on process. So if North St. Paul tonight says, wow, this is good work, we want to rethink our initial reticence and join in the countywide effort, is it just that they would then pass a resolution because they're statutorily, they were created for a certain date, so they have steps they have to take. We had a couple of cities like this. So they would just have to pass a resolution at the council, or what would need to happen? I just don't.
That's a great question. So, Madam Chair, Commissioners, for inclusion in the area of operation, the City of North St. Paul has to pass a resolution agreeing to enter into the county's area of operation by July 1.
Okay.
So they're having the presentation tonight. They will not vote on it tonight. It will come more than likely, if it's, you know, favorably received, at a subsequent council meeting where they will vote on a potential resolution. And then that triggers our areas to put together a resolution and then to have subsequent board actions that expand the area of operation to include North St. Paul.
So it is action by both the council and follow-up by the council. Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, Commissioners. So what we're going to do over the next series of slides is begin to kind of step through a little bit of the data related to the HRA levy. I want to acknowledge, as Carrie mentioned, even on that subsequent slide, we have a whole host of other funding sources that go into projects, and we do really try to keep that one-door mentality in supporting projects in any different, many different ways. So these slides that you'll see over the next, over the next several slides are really focused on the HRA levy. That's what really today's purpose is. So 22 bears out fairly clearly that the focus was on affordable housing projects. And, future years may not be exactly like this. This was the first year of the levy, and so we were very responsive to where projects were in the process, as well as, some of these programs came on at midpoints in the year, and so we were reflecting on where things were at and who was hitting those points. And so I want to acknowledge, while the vast majority of our funding went to affordable housing projects, this was a part of a larger focus to bring on other programs, including our critical corridors, as well as our revamped down payment assistance program that were both initiated in really Q3 of last year, so really the second half of the year, as a direct response to both that need for programming that was more responsive, but also flexible to the community needs and priorities. So I think you'll see some slides here on our down payment assistance program. That went operational in just a few months, and we've had great success. So I would imagine that yellow bar that you see on the screen today will be different next year. We anticipate it to be very different next year. But as a response, is we definitely focused a lot of that funding in 22 to projects that we knew were ready to go and to meet needs. You know, they were definitely corresponding to other funding streams, including our ARPA program, which Max will kind of talk to in a minute. The last thing I was just going to mention before you slide to the next slide, Carrie, is all these, for the majority of these images, including the data that goes behind this, is available on the Open Data Portal and our annual report. So there may be a few slides that are a little bit more specific for today, but the vast majority of them are easily replicable. So this is just a little bit of a further breakdown of that slide that you saw previously, which was just a roll-up. This is by geography. So we do have a subsequent slide that shows a little bit of that splits more on a percentage basis between St. Paul and our suburbs. But as you can see, you know, in our first year, we were pleased to see participation by half of Ramsey County jurisdictions in our programming. And that's not just based on our city partners or projects that were ready to go, but residents who participated within programs, including that down payment home program. Yeah, I think that's a little bit of the, yeah.
Sounds great.
So on this particular slide, I want to call out because the board had made a particular emphasis on not just the number of units, but really deepening affordability. So before I step into the deepening affordability, which is kind of second part of this slide, all of the numbers that you see here, which, you know, roll up to 808 within St. Paul or 344 within suburban Ramsey County, are net new units that the county did not participate in prior years. So these units would have not necessarily been funded by or participated by Ramsey County, but for the Ramsey County HRA. Our numbers were far less than this in prior years when we only had CDBG and home. So this is a big improvement from prior years. So the 1,152 renter occupied housing units that were created and preserved are due in part because of the HRA levy. So prior to the HRA levy, our focus was on supporting as many affordable units as possible. So that was just a slight deviation to what we did. And that was mostly because we had, as you saw in that previous, there was one of the slides at the beginning, we had about $2 million in typical funding we had, complete with all the strings that came with HUD, as well as trying to balance across different needs, including homeownership programs, community infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So, you know, it was the board that made the strong policy decision to say that this HRA levy will be a stronger facilitator of deeply affordable units, more so than it ever had been. So when I mentioned before that the county, this is really net new, typically speaking, CDBG and home funding went to about 5%. 5% of the units went to 30% unit creation or preservation. In this past year, we were close to 20%, actually a little over 20% of the total units that were impacted were at that deeply affordable level. So a big move from prior years.
Yes.
Not a question, but a comment, because I do, thank you, Josh. I think this deserves a pause and a celebration of how much work can be done when we make really good policy, and a celebration of the work of this entire board, but the staff, you know, and the city of St. Paul, who opted into the HRA levy. I mean, it wasn't an automatic, and so to me, this just feels like a moment of celebration. We don't often get that, but it really is a demonstration of when we lead with our values, what we can do, and is an opportunity for us to say congratulations to all of us and to this board for really leading in this way. That was bold and really had the vision and our values. So I just wanted to take that moment to say congrats. Yay, us.
There were 0 units at 30% AMI in Ramsey County in the analysis that we did a few years ago. The gap remains, they were huge.
Yeah.
But to see units showing up on this grid is, I think it gets taken for granted.
Yes.
And it should never be taken for granted, because but for the work of local governments, these numbers don't show up.
And this was during COVID, this was during, concerns around, rent stabilization in the city of St. Paul, like, but for all of that, and still we have these numbers showing up. So I really do think this is an opportunity to celebrate. Thank you, Josh, for sharing that really great news.
Yeah, and the one last thing I was just gonna add, I mean, I do think that, you know, we were in the first year, and, we were pleasantly surprised by how responsive the marketplace, was to this as well. I think there was some early concerns as to, in addition to just not creating new units, is how will the market, respond to this? And, we did definitely see some positive strides. And I think we would expect to see this over the next several years. So, you know, this is a one-year snapshot, and I know there were communities that were not represented on that prior year. They probably actually were represented in some of our other funding streams, that you may see some slides here in a little bit. But, you know, that's our goal, as a team, to get out, having more in-depth conversations with our city partners about, what projects are on their horizon, how residents can partake in programming, that benefits them, and creates wealth. And so this is, one step, but certainly a really big one. Thank you, Commissioner, for that note.
And I just want to amplify this, because the sentiment that we received in our early conversations with many of our suburban communities was that 30% units could be done out in their communities, that it just wasn't, it could be done. And I'm really proud of the solicitations that our housing team led, because we had many different suburban partners asking for funding around that. I know was the big kind of sensitivity was that, you know, we're not going to have projects like that, and therefore we'll never see a return on investment associated with the HRA levy. All good news.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yep.
Holding questions till the end.
Is that what you're asking?
Kind of.
Are you?
Okay, that's okay.
You know,
That's all right.
Madam Chair, we are switching gears to down payment assistance, so if there's a question on the multifamily, now would.
You have a question for this?
Okay, well, yeah, I'm not sure which one it is, but, I'll make this now or later, so it's not gonna add any more time, but, so I'm meeting with my city council, my cities, and I'm gonna be doing city presentations, and I always say, what do you want me to talk about? And they all, I represent all suburban cities, they all want me to talk about the HRA and how it's doing and the metrics, and they all remind me that half city, half suburbs, and what we're looking at. So just want you to know, thank you for keep calling that out, because our cities are paying attention, and I'll be asking you for anything we can share at this point. I'll be doing these meetings in the next month, or over the next few weeks. And so whatever we can show them, I noticed that Lauderdale isn't there, but they have put up recent housing, so you're gonna probably tell me there was a different program for them. And just on the 30%, because you're right, cities, of course, have told us that they can't do that. What got them to there? Just curious, like, you just because you had programs available and they were willing to take a chance, huh? Could you let me know a little more?
I think that the concern from the developer about 30% is always the financing of those, you know, heavily subsidized units. And so if you're saying, look, we'll lean into, you know, reducing the subsidy down to 30%, we've got that, then it kind of reduces that risk associated with the 30% units. And so then it also helps to kind of help from a general performance standpoint. So the developer's concern is more just financial. And so as we come in, and like many different public sector entities often come in, the state, the city, you know, we say we've got that particular unit, and then they generally are receptive, so long as the city has the political will for the unit composition as well.
To be there.
Yep.
And you're saying our cities are open to it, as long as they can get the developers and everything. I'm proud of them, yeah, good, I'm glad we're doing that.
Commissioner Reinhardt.
Yes, most of them, are they buildings or are they mixed? Hope they're mixed. Hope we don't have your question, yeah.
Yeah, so, most of these buildings are mixed income, at different levels of affordability, ranging from 80% down to 30%. So I think we might have one or two examples where there's market and 30% AMI in the same building. So we find that the most, cost-effective model is actually when we have a 60% AMI building and they have a gap, financing gap, and then they apply in for us, for our financing, and, then you're able to add a little bit of 30% AMI in a building that's gonna bring in much greater rents for them as well. So that creates that kind of mix. And we're seeing that both in St. Paul and in suburban Ramsey.
So you're saying they pretty much stepped up because Ramsey County stepped up?
I think that absolutely there's an additional
Summary.
There's an additional flexible funding source that's available in a way it just previously wasn't. Yep.
Well, before we start on the slide, I just want to give a shout out to Portia Jackson.
Yes.
So Portia is leaving Ramsey County for Habitat for Humanity to become the Director of Program and Services at Habitat for
Had us for good friends.
Humanity.
Good friends in good places.
She pretends like she doesn't like the limelight, but every time she's like, oh, I'm behind the scenes. I'm like,
She was signing her emails, your local housing celebrity for a while.
you may remember such greatest hits as the DTA board workshop from last fall. Where that was one of the, I think, I've been in many board workshops. That was one of our most engaging board workshops. Managing our pilot programs for manufactured homes critical repair grants. First time ever that there was resources available for manufactured homes. Single family home critical repair grant. Rehab loan program, the energy efficiency weatherization loan program, and just being like overall our resource for all things owner occupied housing. And a fun fact, Portia was started in Ramsey County as a financial worker 1, and then was a K-State 3, then left Ramsey County for a while. There might have been a gap between, no, that was it. And then she came back as a community development specialist here on CED.
Now she's climbing the ranks over at Habitat, which is just a tremendous opportunity, and we're so thrilled and excited for you.
Minnesota or Twin Cities Habitat?
Ooh, good.
Have them in Ramsey County.
Well, that's
Great partnership.
Yeah, we do.
Yep.
And if patterns hold right, and Portia will be back.
Right.
Could be up here next.
Yeah, with district.
Just saying.
So kind of going back to that board workshop we had in September 2022. Previously, our down payment assistance program was just for first-time home buyers. It was up to, I think we were doing $15,000 loans with home funding. Purchase price was really limited by the HUD rules. And by moving it over to the HRA, we were able to expand to first-generation home buyers and offer that greater percentage while keeping the first-time home buyer program as well, and increasing the purchase price limit to match the state's purchase price limit, which in this market, you were going to need a higher purchase price limit, and so now that purchase price limit is $372,000. We were also able 372.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a low company.
Prior to that, I think it was about 270, and there was only a few homes for sale in suburban Ramsey County at a time. Not a very useful program. And so by adjusting this, we've already done, well, I'll talk 2022, but a lot of this work happened in 2023 as well. Starting in October 1st, 2022, we switched over the program to the new policies and kind of program criteria, and we did $182,000 in loans just in those couple months in 2022. We then continued into 2023, and we've done 14 loans. 70% of those are for residents of color. The average loan is about $60,000 instead of that $25,000. And that kind of indicates that there is a lot of first-generation homebuyers. The majority of them are first-generation homebuyers. And the average AMI is right around 50% AMI. So it really feels like we're hitting the folks we wanted to really hit with this program.
Yes, Commissioner Ortega.
Maybe I should let you finish. But on the bottom, you have locations, right? You have the 4 suburban cities. Is there a preference for that, or is there more going there?
So for,
I don't think there's anything wrong, I'm just curious.
no, those were just the ones where the loans were funded,
Okay,
in this period of time.
gotcha.
It's available to all suburban Ramsey County cities, and then it is available to City of St. Paul if we're investing in the supply. So, for example, if the tax forfeited piece of property becomes a first-generation home buyer, then we can connect DPA to it. City of St. Paul.
Because my assumption when I saw that was that there's probably more opportunity in the suburbs.
I would say that if we're thinking just from a stock, like a housing stock,
That's what I'm talking
yeah,
about.
I would say there's more opportunities, for that stock in the City of St. Paul.
Oh, really?
Because of neighborhoods like the North End and the East Side having the majority of homes under 372,000.
I see.
There's many communities in suburban Ramsey County where that average home is greater than 372,000. And so this program really allows that opportunity for a family to move into those communities.
Okay.
Isn't this presentation just really geared towards more of what we've done with the suburban communities? Is that a factor here?
Well, go ahead,
Yeah.
Matt.
I was gonna say, because this program was originally home funded with, federal dollars, we continued that in this kind of first iteration of that, with just doing suburban, as we kind of slow walk ourselves into this. And then City of St. Paul, with their inheritance fund and their, reinvesting in their down payment assistance program, carries the program for the City of St. Paul.
Commissioner
Yeah, I
Reinhardt?
think it gets confusing because, for example, it says North St. Paul. Well, North St. Paul isn't part of the HRA levy. Because the way they did, my understanding, and it made it a whole lot easier for folks applying, was they said, okay, tell us what you want to do, and we'll figure out what funding source is available for that. So this wasn't HRA levy, this was the home fund.
So that North St. Paul loan is actually just a little caveat.
With an asterisk there, by
So
White Bear Lake and
this
North
down
St.
payment
Paul. Yeah.
assistance program is funded with HRA.
Mm.
We had a home buyer where we still had a little bit of home funding left. And so that's our last home funded,
And White Bear Lake had part of it too?
Mhm.
yeah, there was 2 home funded loans that occurred,
Thank you.
before we switched funding sources.
Mhm.
So we were like,
But
Okay,
that
we
was,
haven't- yeah.
I mean, one of the ways that you were able to make this easier for folks was so that they didn't have to figure out, okay, am I applying for home, am I applying for this or that or the other thing?
yeah, so moving forward, all loans will just be HRA in this program.
Okay.
And Madam Chair and Commissioners, one thing that we've, Commissioner John, our wealth generation kind of call out associated with the HRA levy will be balanced between St. Paul and we, as Max mentioned, had to pull this out of home and then, did our first kind of pilot iteration for suburban homeowners. But we wanted to allow the City of St. Paul to get their program off the ground with the Inheritance Fund and their DPA program. And now that we're looking, they are very oversubscribed, so we're in continued conversations about ways that our 2 programs can complement one another, so that if they've got a homeowner ready to go, maybe down the road, we can jump in and help out. So there's a lot of opportunity to coordinate our programs moving forward. And initially, we thought maybe they'd be in competition with one another, and that is clearly not the case. So, all good things.
Oh, gosh.
Okay,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
so I'm just thinking about this, city suburban, we want it to be, everybody's paying into it, so we want it to, be 50-50. So, the way I'm thinking of it is, City of St. Paul has other tools that the suburbs don't have, so they don't have to use the HRA levy for their down payment assistance, because they have other programs that we don't have in the suburbs. So we're using our HRA levy for this down payment assistance, because the city can do that on their own. That's why there's only suburbs funded here with this. Am I thinking of it sort of the right way?
I think so. In conversations we've had with City of St. Paul housing team, there's an opportunity. So, for example, this summer we're going to do a small-scale solicitation that helps to write down the cost associated or the vertical construction, that we can then say, hey, City of St. Paul, can you match your DPA program with this project to help emerging developers? And so there's I guess, greater programmatic opportunities in the City of St. Paul for us to partner in unique ways, but to still advance the goals of wealth generation, in ways that the suburban communities don't quite have that programmatic build-out quite yet. And so right now, what's been really beneficial is down payment assistance. More to elaborate there.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner McGuire, we do want to honor the programs that exist in the City of St. Paul, and like, I think launching this right at the same time that they were announcing Inheritance Fund would have been a kind of, now that we've seen, as Director Collins stated, like, how that one's been so successful, and is already oversubscribed as well, that there is a big need in there, and now conversations can continue based off of the board action that was approved just a week or two ago on the Wealth Creation Initiative. I think the last point on this is just, if we look at that little arrow, we only did $15,000 in loans in 2021.
Awesome.
182,000 in 2022, and then we just finished out the $822,000 from the HRA last year, and so then now we're re-upped for 1.5, so you'll continue to see this number grow.
And what's the I'm
Go ahead,
sorry.
no. Go ahead.
What is the repayment on those loans?
Yeah, so, for first-time buyers, it is a repay upon sale or refinance for cash. So if they sell the home, then they pay back the loan. For first-generation home buyers, it's, forgivable after 20 years.
Mm.
So it incentivizes that kind of staying in place as well.
Yes, okay, got it, thank you.
Commissioners, just one last, just to kind of close out or close the loop of these different programs that we've had. So you'll undoubtedly see versions of this critical corridors piece coming forward here in the next several weeks as we provide you some additional information related to the next round of critical corridors, which will be focused on pre-development in our commercial corridor initiative. But this was a program that I can say has been a part of this team for the longest. This was one that our suburban partners definitely expressed a desire for more flexible funding, early planning related funding, as well as, project costs that didn't necessarily fit into other categories. And so, this past year, we had great response in our fall solicitations for development and infrastructure, which is, again, this kind of gap financing piece, and then our pre-development planning and commercial initiatives. As you can see, St. Paul was a participant in that process. This was how we had kind of set it up, is the commercial corridor initiative, which the city of St. Paul, like the down payment assistance program that they do have kind of a peer program. It's called, I think it's their STAR program. And so what we did was we kind of mirrored some aspects of that and moved it as a suburban program. So it's not a huge part of the pie here, but is definitely one that was responding to our community's call for some additional flexible funding for projects that advance affordable housing, projects located within transit corridors, things that have long been hopes, and we were able to respond.
Mr. Reinhardt.
So the definition of a critical corridor is basically what you just listed. I mean, transit corridors, things like that, or where there's underserved people. How do we designate them, or do they say they're a critical corridor because, and we say, okay, yes or no?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Reinhardt, we took a very, very loose interpretation of critical corridors in this first year. And what we said was they had to be basically critical transit corridors or commercial corridors. We did apply a map, or we created a map, and we worked with cities to say, what corridors are out there that are important to you. Sometimes it's a corridor is critical because it connects two corridors as well. And so that's what we responded to. I think in future years, we'll reassess that map. But I think it was a very good, because our communities were the ones who helped create that map. But two, I think all the projects came in right along those corridors and exactly where we thought they were going to be.
And so now for the gold line, obviously it's being constructed. Purple line is going to be once we figure out where we're going, it'll be later than that. So at what point do they become critical corridors? Because there's not transit there per se now.
Madam Chair, I would say all of our county facilities, for the most part, on the map are considered critical corridors, because again, we wanted every community to be able to find a project that could fall along a corridor that maybe has a range of land uses. And so, for example, there were a couple communities that said, you know, we have no transit out here, we're never going to be able to apply for this program. We said, no, that's why you should absolutely apply for this program, so that you can help density along corridors to make those connections. And so it's really, really a broad interpretation. It's basically almost every quasi-commercial mixed-use corridor spans residential roads. And so, and even then, there are some that are really great opportunities for greater density. So the map is almost just a hodgepodge blend of I think it's green everywhere. And it's great because it's very inclusive of every county facility.
Yeah, correct.
All the county roads.
Yeah,
It's the green.
All the green.
Yeah, Commissioner Reinhardt, this was both existing and future transit corridors.
So the lakes aren't included.
Oh, geez.
That would have been
Every community is a transit.
Critical, we're critical.
About White Bear Avenue, and
Yeah.
then possible alignment there. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, Commissioner Reinhardt, what I mentioned was, it was all existing or future transit corridors is what we defined that as.
Harry, I think you become politically astute and made it all good.
I didn't want to step in it as they. Speaking of politically astute, and take a look at this graphic.
So I'm just wondering, for clarity, when you say our communities, I'm just wondering, what is our communities?
Madam Chair, what I meant was the 19 Ramsey County cities.
Okay.
That.
We're talking about
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I just want
Sure.
Yeah, sans North St. Paul in the context of this HRA levy.
Yeah.
And just one last point on the critical communities. And there is a part of it where, right, there's a lot of green, but there's two dynamics that I think from the beginning and even before we had the funding to have the process that continued. One, large-scale transit projects do bring focused investment, both through local and federal funds, into a corridor that otherwise wouldn't exist. And what we hear in a lot of the rest of our community is, you want us to become more transit ready, you want us to think about density and accessibility for others. We're not in one of these areas that's going to get $240 million from the federal government. What do we do? And this is one of those responses. And actually, interestingly enough, North St. Paul is a community where I sat with and we had this conversation once. Like, our main street, we believe, is a critical corridor. I think we would agree with that. They're not on a direct major transit line. How does that work? The other reason that it helps is communities have a tendency, even though that map is green everywhere, it forces the declaration of where prioritization for investment lies, and you can then think about overlapping funding sources and design patterns as people apply for specific corridors. And for a long time, otherwise, when money becomes available, the previous status quo in this community was often advocate for individual whatever in this community and have the money go out with no sense of placemaking or how you connect transit, housing, and other types of development. And this has allowed us to take thoughtful looks at those different corridors as we develop them in alignment with city needs. That's where the value hopefully comes in as we continue to go.
And I can agree with that, because with the Green Line, one of the things that we heard as the Green Line was coming is that it's going to spur redevelopment in the corridor, which is along the transit areas. That's why you see all the developments that's happening within that corridor of the Green Line. Very intentional.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, the slide you've all been waiting for. We did have a series of, high volume of proposals and projects that came through, and I would say if there's painful, reoccurring sentiment across Team CED is driving home the degree of parity across the suburban communities in the city of St. Paul, because whether it be the 10% admin cap or it be the parity, this is such a new funding source for the county, and we wanted to make sure that we made good on our commitment to our city partners. So as you can see, I mean, in year one, it couldn't have gone any better in terms of the parity and the geographic disposition. We're super excited as to what that 3-year look, what that 5-year look will look like. It may not look like this, but in year 1, we're really pleased to say we heard you and we honored that commitment, and dispersed a lot of really great projects. Yep.
Ortega, then, McGuire.
So, does, with the city of St. Paul, do they understand the flexibility? Is there flexibility? Because when it was just a county, right, we had the 50-50 suburban. But some years it'll be 70 city, and another year it'll be 70 suburb, because the projects come in at different timelines, right? Do we have that kind of flexibility?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, I think if we can show good faith effort that we strived to disperse with this particular, caveat, I think, then I think we did everything we could. Then there will be times when, depending on market changes, so much is driven by external variables. And so market changes or landscape changes, economic, inflation will drive either lower projects or greater volume of projects. And so to your point, it may not always look like this. But
Right.
if
It
we
won't.
can
That's
strive,
my point.
right, it won't. And if we can strive, however, to try to balance out our investment.
But so you feel like we could get to, with that portion of the money with St. Paul, to that point?
Yeah.
Because there are gonna be times when they're gonna need more than 50%, for example. And we gotta be flexible the other way, right?
Absolutely.
Then the second point is, can you make sure that, Mary Jo gets this slide?
No, that's the one I'm gonna show. I'm gonna show this to my suburbs. The city of St. Paul was actually worried. That's what I'm
Madam Chair, Commissioners, we have had a number of communities reach out and wanting that. A big reason we have been able to balance this is because we have had almost a release valve in that of other funding sources like ARPA. And so the degree and the volume of demand for various projects is greater in St. Paul, and we have been, as you'll see in the upcoming slides, been able to advance so many projects through ARPA. In the years moving ahead, we may not always have that release valve. To your point, Commissioner Ortega, it might not always look like this because there may be projects that hit our equity goals far greater in other areas than that of others, and we still need to honor our commitment to.
I really appreciate you, Commissioner Ortega, bringing this up, because it's along my point as well, is that I've been telling my cities, it may not be that way every year, but in the balance of over 3 years or 2 years. But I think for the beginning of the program, this is a really great slide to show. I mean, like you were right, politically, this is a really good thing. And I mean, they're all gonna say, well, you could do it the first year, but not the second. But I think they all kind of get this. But to know that they are getting some of it, like you couldn't do an 80-20 the first year, because then they're like, see, it's what we worried about. So just thank you for this, and I think it will help, and I think we need to, I'm getting my communities, of course, to expect that it may not always be like this, but in the average and, and over the years, it will balance itself out.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Should I do,
Well, and I was just gonna say that was the biggest concern going in, was the suburbs said, well, it's all gonna go to St. Paul, and St. Paul said, well, it's all gonna go to the suburbs, and so, it's like, well, at least you're guided along the same lines.
Right.
But the fact is, we had the Environmental Response Fund,
Yeah.
which we set up pretty much the same way, and, I mean, that was just something that we as a county said, we need to do this. And one of the reasons was, again, I mean, we could spend every dime in St. Paul. And so the suburbs, I think, were really concerned about that. But we had that, history with the Environmental Response Fund, which means it's more work for our staff to make sure that they're out there recruiting and saying, hey, did you know this is available? And this is the first year for this. And so it's going to get, I would hope, more robust as we go along, but there's also, you never know what it's gonna be, and that's one of the things when we were first talking about this and the city of St. Paul said that, I said, well, as long as they understand that it's not gonna be just that every single year, but over, as an average, we will make sure that happens, because I don't think there's any doubt that we can make that happen. But it's not gonna be every single year, it just happens to be the first year.
Okay, County Manager.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Carrie said something profound. I want to actually say one more time.
Okay, let's all write that down.
Write it down,
Not
okay?
the first, by no means the first time. But I think this is actually really important going forward to make sure that we're talking about with our cities. So this release valve piece here is a significant issue. There's been such a demand that the first year was quote unquote easy because there's more money and there's just so much demand that everyone has some level. What is underlying your comment that you were less explicit on, and I appreciate that, but I'm going to be more explicit, is not every community wants to invest right now at 30% AMI, which is the priority of what we have discussed here. If all communities are willing to invest at 30% area median income as a part of their housing strategy, this can stay pretty close to 50-50. The need is there, the demand is there. It's if you encounter communities who say, we don't want that product, then the point is our resources can by no means go 50-50 in the end because the shares won't work. And so the more we can continue to encourage all cities to be a part of building affordable mixes, and the county wants to be a part of that, the closer this actually then stays to 50-50 going forward. And I just wanted to underscore that. That's a really important point. And the more we do now, like League of Local Governments, Commissioner McGuire, you talk about a lot, the continued conversation of this there and saying we want to stay as close to 50-50, but that means you have to be a part of that vision. We're not going to do 80% AMI with our HRA levy.
And have you done this to League of Local Governments lately or ever?
You are our first.
Oh, okay, so, wow, so we probably want to bring it there, have an audience there.
Just, okay, to Ryan's point.
That's why I've been so adamant over the last 10 years at least, that our housing has to be mixed. If you want to maintain this 50%, because you will have communities rejecting, buildings that are 100%, 30 AMI or 50%. It isn't going to happen. And that's why I asked the question, and we need to get the suburbs on board to make that happen, because we got to participate 50-50 also.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing that we see this now, that we have an investment in the city and in the suburbs, right? And we see mixed income housing, is like almost evenly populated in both areas. And again, I think it's really because Ramsey County has stepped up, because sometimes it's a bigger risk for some developers and others who can say that 30% AMI is not what we want, or the suburban or local, who may say, we don't want to take that type of risk because. But when we step up and share in that cost and make it a value, it's like a value statement again about what we here at Ramsey County is looking to do, we see more of an equitable process, or equal or equitable process. And that's a good thing, I think.
And Madam Chair and Commissioners, we'll move on quickly here because we've got to go through the ARPA stuff, but I just want to highlight, at no point in time when we went through the ECI plan and we, all the data, did we have any hidden agendas. And to your point, we said very explicitly what the target was, and we were very intentional in terms of what we were trying to invest in, and not shying away, not being apologetic, being very explicit in terms of how we intended to invest. And I think that led us to this point as well, and that there was no, gotchas, there's nothing. The ECI plan spelled it out, and we drove investments against the plan. We brought them along with us, and there will always be communities that are opting out. And yet there will be communities that are on the fence, but when they see their adjacent communities are investing in it, then it becomes an economic and political imperative. So this, to your point, is just the start, but it was beneficial that the county authorized that plan so that all partners were brought along at the start.
Okay. So if we don't mind, we're going to move forward with the ARPA piece of this.
So in 2022, our other big kind of new funding source was American Rescue Plan Act. In 2021, the Board of Commissioners approved $37 million of American Rescue Plan Act. And so over the course from winter of 2021 until now, we've been working hard to obligate those dollars to projects and then spend down the project fund by the federal deadline. We need to obligate all dollars by the end of 2024, and all those dollars need to be spent by 2026. So in 2021, that felt far away, and now it feels much closer. No, so now we're kind of in a sprint here. Our focus on this funding was to invest in 30% AMI through the new construction, and we did a engagement plan with the city of St. Paul and really reached out to all the partners of Heading Home Ramsey who are working with folks who are dealing with housing instability and homelessness, and what do they need, and it was the supply and then the supports that go along with this. These are supply dollars. And so that project readiness is really imperative when we think about that federal timeline. And because of the investment that the board made, the city of St. Paul matched that to create a fund of $74 million, and they are almost done obligating their dollars as well. And today we met with them to consider our next round of investment. That collaboration is occurring. Next slide. So this is how ARPA has been obligated so far. So $13 million has gone to the city of St. Paul. Just under $9 million has gone to projects in suburban Ramsey County. And then we still have about $14.5 million for unallocated to projects or for administrative costs. We were estimating that admin would be about 5% of the total grant of this. And so considering that, we have about 14 million or so left for projects that will be selected out of this current housing solicitation that closed in March, and we're currently in review and negotiations of the projects, and we will be bringing recommendations to the board for consideration in May, and we'll kind of give an overview of this at the board on May 2nd as well. Good point, yeah. So we received 27 applications this year, requests. I believe it was $65 million in requests. So Jericho Gomez, who just walked up to the bathroom, and I have been hard at work working through this project. So we're meeting with the city of St. Paul, the state of Minnesota, Baker Tilly, our third-party financial consultant, and then following up with developers to make sure that the investments are aligned with our scoring, our strategic plans, and then make financial sense as well. So it's been a lot of work right in the spring every year now. But we're right in the midst of that, and I think we can repeat kind of what we saw in 2022.
Are you trying to do parity? I mean, are you trying to do 50-50 with these dollars as well, or not necessarily? This is more about deeply affordable housing.
Yeah, I think.
You're trying to find it throughout the county, because you could probably do it all in St. Paul, but we want to spread it out, right, to other places. And are you thinking that with all these applications, you're going to hopefully get there, in just 2 years, or when do you have to?
2 years, no, what? Yeah, 2 years.
It's 2 years, we have to have it, do we have to have it spent or just
No,
allocated? Just obligated, yeah, just obligated, right.
Yeah, I think, so ARPA we have to follow a federal procurement process, and so our funding is really based off of the scoring that the review teams do, and so we have to kind of go down that list. And so, but we're seeing a good mix of city projects and suburban projects scoring well, and that's why we see this even parity between those. And one of the biggest scoring areas is affordability, and so they get points on the percentage of units that are at 30% AMI, and then if they get extra points, if that doesn't require additional rental subsidy as well, like vouchers or anything else. And so we're seeing those projects throughout the county, and
Oh, my time, Commissioner.
Would you go back to the last slide? Can you just explain a little bit about the unallocated and administration costs? Like, was that just like spending like for our overhead?
So the unallocated, Commissioner Zhang, is what we have not obligated to a project yet.
Oh, okay.
And then we're estimating administrative costs to be about 5% of the total.
Okay.
So that's kind of our flexible pot still.
Okay, and then this is just the county's ARPA funds. Okay, thank you.
I would suggest that you break out the unallocated and the administration.
Yeah.
Because I thought the same thing. I was like, we spent what?
Our staff got paid really well. Madam Chair,
Yes.
And just as an overview on our overall ARPA spend, about a third of Ramsey County's total ARPA allocation has been dedicated to this use, to give you a sense. I will also just say here, at this point, like, we're continuing to monitor ARPA spend as we go. This is the conversation with the CFO. Mid this year, we're gonna take stock of where we're at on ARPA spend, and we'll look back at where our priorities lie, and we may have additional conversations on that. Just by way of reminder, the top areas of spend are, this was number 1, violence prevention was number 2, workforce was number 3. Why are you looking at me sideways? What am I missing?
No, I'll comment when you're done.
Okay. These are the 3 largest areas of our spend. And these are tough choices that we made, but that's where a majority of our money's gone, and we're continuing to get updates on where we're at in our obligated spend relative to those timelines. And that's just an important part as we go. I don't feel a need to suggest that we're gonna have to open up new priorities. I think our priorities are right. It's just making sure you spend every last penny on the timelines you got.
Well, but in that, Madam Chair, if I don't mind, we specifically said any unspent funds would go directly back to housing as a priority. You know, it was written in that very first resolution, as Commissioner McDonough made that amendment. So if there are leftover dollars, it goes back to this department.
So, Madam Chair, I'll go back and read that. I have a slightly different memory of what it says, which is not me trying to sound resistant to that or anything. I'd be okay with that. I think it says something slightly different in the end. That's where he started. I'm not sure if it's where he ended. But I thought it was more of a ceiling or a floor to ensure a hard floor as opposed, but anyway.
Yeah.
I hear you,
I
and
think it all goes back to housing.
Which is not really a bad thing.
No, it's a good.
no, I'm not making an argument.
Okay.
I would only say it's a good guiding post for a conversation. Before we reallocate any money, that conversation should come back to the board as a double check regardless,
Okay.
would be my proposal. And we'll use that resolution as a guiding light to whatever might come back. And we're not at a point right now to do that anyway.
Okay.
And, Madam Chair, my memory was that it wasn't an automatic, but that was the intention. And so all that means is it has to come back to the board.
Yeah.
I would just, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would ask that conversation, that policy level conversation happen earlier than later because, the funds do have to be obligated for projects by
Yeah.
the end of 2024. So we do need a longer runway associated, some of the projects and what's available to us.
Okay. Think about that deadline for us, that we need to bring it back here.
And then this is just kind of digging one layer deeper into which communities was this spent. So you can see St. Paul has the majority of the funding, but you see Little Lauderdale coming in second here.
So happy with that. They are so appreciative of that. They did a great project. They have a great project there.
And that layered other funding as well. And then we have Little Canada, Maplewood, and Moundsview. So we see that kind of distribution across the county.
Almost, yeah.
Mhm.
45.
Our other big grant that hit at the same time as the other ones was CDBG coronavirus. So this funding arrived, and the board really allocated it to different uses in 2021. So 2021, 2022, and now we're kind of finishing it up here in 2023. I want to thank Heather Posthumus for all of her work on all of the service and infrastructure, and then Portia has CDBG CV funded projects as well. This has been this is another quick sprint of a grant here. We received $1.7 million approximately for this, and it more or less has the same restrictions as CDBG, except it's flexible so that you can spend it back. So we focused on food resources, legal aid services, the emergency family hotel program, mortgage assistance, and the critical repair pilots. And so this has all had to be used in suburban Ramsey County.
A breakdown of, sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Breakdown of cities in that one? Just,
We do.
we can get,
We're gonna,
coming up. Oh, is it? Oh, man, there it is. Sorry, I need.
so in food resources, this little the $1.7 million had a lot of impact. 5,200 individual participants were served with food resources in suburban Ramsey County. The need is there out in suburban Ramsey County. We funded 3 legal aid organizations to help with all the kind of housing turnover that was happening during this time. Almost 500 total participants served there. We partnered with the Minnesota Homeownership Center for mortgage assistance, and 22 individual households were able to get mortgage assistance to save their home. 47 total participants were able to stay at the emergency. is a long outstanding housing stability program that we were able to add on to. And then the 2 critical repair grants, both the manufactured home critical repair pilot and the owner-occupied critical repair pilot. And the need we're seeing in that manufactured home critical repair is huge, and the need was much higher than we were anticipating there. And so we'll see a recommendation at the HRA to use CDBG dollars to continue critical repair program. And so, Commissioner McGuire, here's kind of the breakdown of just the critical repair piece in terms of communities. So this is both single-family and manufactured homes. And we see Maplewood, Little Canada, and Shoreview. I think those Little Canada and Shoreview ones are majority mobile home parks, whereas the other communities are mostly single-family. We were really working in, there's one Shoreview one where the new owner came in and was kind of really pushing residents to repair their homes, even though they did not have the funding to do that. And so that was with a provider named Slipstream. They're out of Madison, Wisconsin, and then they partner locally with Rebuilding Together Minnesota as their kind of local partner, and 15 households received grants there. And then on owner-occupied, CapRW is our partner there, and they served 29 so far, and we extended their agreements a little bit, go into the summer as well.
Commissioner Reinhardt. If I remember correctly, Rebuilding Together is a nonprofit that assists with folks that have been chemically dependent. Is that correct?
I believe so. Heather, do you
I mean,
remember?
I think, to me, that's worth noting. I don't remember exactly the clientele that they serve, but I know that they are out there. It's more than just the work that they do. It's the people that they employ, that it's a second chance for them.
Yeah, that's great.
And so I think that that's important in this too. That's a benefit that doesn't necessarily show up in these numbers.
Can you give examples of, you probably did, but of critical repairs?
Yeah, so on the mobile home park, we're finding folks in the middle of winter had holes in their roofs, water leaking in, ruining their appliances, ruining their kind of subflooring. Mobile home park residents, mobile home park owners wanting siding replaced, or they're going to face eviction out of the park. On owner-occupied, again, holes in the roofs, broken boilers, those types of things.
Yeah, that's great. Program.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, just to add a point to what Max said, because the work around this idea around a critical repair has been kind of, it works for a while on our team. And it was, we didn't provide data here on our normal CDBG funded owner-occupied rehab programs. This is in the energy efficiency and in the other ones. And what we had heard in the past is that there's repairs that need to critically happen to keep people within their homes to respond to really life safety issues. And so this, if I'm channeling a little bit of Denise and Mary Lou from a while back, this was a desire from them, was to kickstart a critical repair program, because they were receiving a tremendous amount of phone calls related to the program, to the other rehab programs, and how we really couldn't serve them. We were limited in funding, we were limited in things, and it was really actually the CV program that opened our opportunities up to kind of deploying these funds in a slightly different way. So I just want to acknowledge, this was work that we've been thinking about, and also we've been, kind of listening to communities. Because I remember on several calls, including residents within North St. Paul many years ago, where we were just unfortunately did not have a funding stream to be able to support a couple residents who were impacted by some really dire living conditions.
Yes, it seems like a really great program, project, opportunity, and to help CAP to be leading that area. It's kind of like what they do too. They play a big role in things like that. I'm just thinking with the opera funds and, what do we do when it all goes away? How do we keep this?
I mean,
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
the local government.
sorry, I don't know why I looked at Madam Chair, I mean, the reality is, we don't have a way to sustain $106 million of one-time funding. That would represent a 30 to 35% levy increase to be able to think about the size of
Can't do
that.
that.
And so, what it means is, we're trying to make smart investments that are also, in many cases, one-time in nature, where if the funding goes away, the programs were developed in a way where additional infusions can matter. And so for even some of these areas of work, let's say the money does, I mean, some of this money is just not going to be available anymore, but as we begin to advocate going forward at the state and federal level, we have proof of concepts now. We have proven how, part of the great thing about this work you see here is you're able to scale the priorities on a level you wouldn't otherwise have been able to do.
True.
We're going to have $11 million a year. We got to basically add an additional 4 years out of nowhere to our work overall. And what we need to keep saying is, when the state says, oh, but all we have is one-time money, part of my answer is, okay, I mean, we've proven we can use one-time money to build housing. I mean, we'll take one-time money on that. So I think that's the key, is to continue to be ready to advocate as this money dries up.
Just on this point, and we're calling them pilots because it's one time, I mean, and it's a program that it's newer for us, even though we've wanted to do it. And so if we get more money, we just do more, right? It stays a pilot. I'm guessing we had a waiting list. I'm guessing we could have done a lot more, but this is all the money that we had, and that's how we can demonstrate to Congress and the state, listen, give us more money. I mean, have it be more than one time, and we can do more. So it's our mantra.
And Madam Chair and Commissioners, I think too, when we don't have the one-time money, they say, where are you seeing gaps along the housing continuum? It's easy for us to say, we used to fund this amazing critical repair program. However, we lost, the one-time funding. Can you step in and help fill the gap? So it allows us to say, this is a program that works. There's a lot of demand out there. We just need to find a unique or new funding source.
Right.
That's good.
Right.
All right, so what to expect now that we're in 2023? So the levy this year is $11.4 million, and as mentioned, North St. Paul is receiving their presentation tonight. This is just an informational meeting, and so hopefully they'll consider entry into it in the weeks and months to come. And we'll continue to invest in the kind of slate of programming because it proved successful, and we certainly have a lot of demand along multifamily, wealth generation, critical corridor, and innovation. And we'll continue to pursue the geographic period. We'll continue to see how that works in the upcoming years. As mentioned, this information can be found in our annual reports that's listed on the website. Our goal is to get all the ARPA dollars obligated before year's end, considering the degree of demand that Max mentioned. And then just tracking all of the closings and getting the dollars in order. One thing to be mindful of is oftentimes a project will come in seeking county funds to better position themselves for the state's RFP, consolidated RFP process. And so it might take a while for them to compile all the various funding sources needed to make it. There's typically a long runway associated with the closings with those projects. And then lastly, we'll just continue to spend on the CDBG CV and CDBG funds, kind of work against those time. Any questions or feedback at this time?
Madam Chair, I had one question.
Yeah.
I'm just curious on the ARPA spend specifically. So I think there are communities that got larger ARPA allocations in St. Paul, Ramsey County that spent more on the pure dollar side in building housing than we did, if I remember correctly. But so that's not my question. Like, size of the program isn't the issue. I'm just trying to understand, is there any other community that we know of in which this, like the largest city and the county partnered together to do a shared priority around the investment? Because I just gotta say, like, I don't know of any other community where that has happened. It's one thing to have one jurisdiction say we're gonna fund 30%. It's another thing to have two jurisdictions pool together, align money.
I haven't heard of any synergies, quite like ours, but, Max has also been working on home, kind of measures that were established by the Biden administration. And so I don't know if you've seen other unique jurisdictions partnering in various ways on there.
And change that to House
Oh,
America.
House America,
Rather
not
than
heading
heading
home,
home. I
yeah.
was like, which one is that? Okay, House America.
House America.
There might, I don't think like two very distinct things, maybe like Los Angeles City and Los Angeles County working together, or.
Yeah, but they.
This is my memory, and so this is what I've seen so far too, through the Brookings stuff and other things. I'm not saying there's not another community, but in the conversations around how do you think about one-time money and how do you think about leveraging platforms,
Right.
there's a really powerful message there about a functional region where investments will be well spent and well prioritized in this space. And this would be it's a pretty significant bar to have already climbed over, which is to say, like, we're already doing it in a partnership. And like the other big investment areas, I remember Detroit has put money into this, but it's not a city-county partnership, and some other places. And so I just think we should keep that on our radar in the advocacy arena going forward.
Very good.
Yes, Commissioner Zong.
Yeah, you know, with this conversation, I really just want to encourage us leveraging that federal partnership too, because just with how the conversations are panning out at the state. And even if the state chooses to like give more, right, like it just won't be enough, basically, right? So, we do need to, you know, just elevate that, and, Commissioner McGuire, looking to you.
Yes.
As your role on NACO to all of us, yes, you. And then the other part is my question to the slide and presentation for North St. Paul. Has there been an analysis done that if they join us, like, what would that levy be?
Yes.
More.
If they, Madam Chair, Commissioners, North St. Paul currently represents 1.8% of the total tax base, which, is roughly about a couple $100,000. You know, I have to say though, and what we'll share tonight, this evening, is North St. Paul's or the Gem Lakes or, you know, some of these smaller communities really have, far more to gain by entry into this, because you will more than likely get far more than what the city puts in terms of a return on investment. And I know that they have a lot of need, and I know that there are blighted properties in need of critical corridor grants at various stages, and they do have needs around especially down payment assistance and multifamily investments. So it certainly seems like a no-brainer to me, but, you know, they've got to weigh that decision.
Well, okay, Reinhardt, McGuire.
I can tell you from when we had the discussion the first time, I think the change, and one of the reasons that the council did change was because of the attitude of the folks that are no longer there. Because the arguments that were used against it had nothing to do with what it was actually going to provide. And no matter what you said, and Terry did a fantastic job, but there was, you can't, it's very hard to combat just plain misstatements that were on purpose. And to say, well, no, that's not true, and they just kept coming back to it. So, but they're no longer there. And I think the fact that the current city councils asked us to come back, I am very optimistic.
Commissioner McGuire.
Thanks, and I just so appreciate these stories. I know Ryan kept looking at me too. This is a story we need to write up. I mean, the White House has asked us to come several times, you know, to talk about our ARPA spending, our ARPA allocations. They want to know the good work that we're doing, and around the country, counties are, I don't think anybody's doing it as good as we are. I always say that, but, we are all trying, you know, to do the best we can, but no, it's true. But, the more that we can tell this story, we're not alone that these need to be more than one-time dollars, and we are fighting. We're trying to work with this administration and with Congress to make sure they understand this. Like, we need more than one-time funding. This has been transformative in the work that we do to have these dollars, and we can continue to do transformative work if we keep getting these dollars. So this is a great story. I'm going to get us to write this up, make sure it's in there, because now we have numbers to show, and this is what they want to help them. I think there's really strong supporters in Congress and and with this administration to help us, but we need to keep the stories coming, because we know we need more than one time. And It'll just be all of us keep doing the work we're doing here at AMC and at NACO. I mean, that's why this is all really important. So thanks. I do have one question. I wrote it back when I thought we weren't gonna ask questions during the presentation. Can you just tell me, the wealth generation programs? I know that it's part of the down payment assistance. What are the other wealth generation programs? Are there any others? It says programs, so I was just curious what other ones there are.
So the board action, a couple of weeks ago really created that kind of flexible fund.
Okay,
And,
so-
new ideas, for example, using tax forfeited properties directly for homeowners,
Okay.
partnerships with land trusts, or, I'll say, hearing people's voices in my head right now, or other equity building initiatives, yeah.
So it's just an open, it's just a place for good creativity. Thank you. Thank you for all your work. I mean,
Madam Chair?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I want to just kind of go back and say that I celebrate all the work that you all have done. When we first started talking to all of our communities about the HRA levy, not just St. Paul and North St. Paul, there was speculation on whether we would follow through with our commitments.
Yeah.
And this presentation has demonstrated that we committed to a 50-50 split. We committed to the work and the way that we were going deeply affordable. That was really important to St. Paul. It was also really important to our suburbs. So I think, like, this is really great that we can demonstrate, like, we mean what we say, we're gonna deliver, and we're gonna come back. And in those initial conversations, and for those that, the two new board members, we had attempted to do this HRA levy earlier, and it failed. And this is the team that was able to deliver, and in those commitments, and it's really important that we built relationships, that we built trust, and that partnership that didn't exist before. So that cannot be overstated. It took a lot of work, and it was difficult. This is really a success. At the same time, when we did those HRA conversations, there was a lot of conversations about what's the next step? Do we become an EDA? So Economic Development Authority, beyond just housing, but now how does it go into economic development in other areas? And I think this is a good platform for us to build on that. And I know you're like taking, but, you know, if we're here, the next step is, you know, as we tie together our critical corridors that we talked about earlier, that is around economic development and housing, transit corridors, you know, we're one of the only metro counties that doesn't have a CDA, EDA, and I know that conversation is, so where do we go from here in that? This, to me, feels like a great foundation. We can point back to say, we said we were gonna do, and are you hearing those requests from those same communities?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, wow, that's a tremendous question.
Yeah.
I will say, so when I was at the City of Roseville, we had an HRA, and then that process, we transitioned. And if they wanted to, they could levy under both and an HRA. So it's kind of a, and they've moved towards an EDA to allow for the greatest flexibility of funds. So I do think if the goal is flexibility of funds, that is great, in addition to an HRA, again, in terms of annual, reliable resources. What I will say is that there is a big part of the ECI plan that hasn't had a degree of investment, and that's along small business entrepreneurship space. That was the kind of impetus for that congressional earmark that we were successful in receiving from Senator. And yet that too is a one-time fund, and in terms of an economic imperative and really driving intentional investment in racial inequity, that is one area that could be better served through an EDA in terms of small business support. And so as we look to the impetus, the rationale for why and why we might expand, that is one body of work that just has, we're only scratching the surface. So.
Well, I'm here for when we're ready for those conversations, because I do think it's the direction that we have committed to, and we're laying the foundation. And so when we're ready and we have capacity, we're working really hard, that you know, I think that we're building, and you're doing a great job building for that.
Manager O'Connor.
Madam Chair, I'll just say, I don't intend to propose that as a part of the 24-25 budget. I'll just say that now. It's a good reminder, actually, back to where the conversation's been. I'll admit it has not been top of mind. And I don't say not propose it because it's not a good idea. It does definitely aligns with conversations we've even had around what to prioritize here. Because we got to get through this ARPA spend, do it right, make sure we spend every last penny. I think we need a little bit of time here to finish the fallout of all the COVID trickle down. Hopefully North St. Paul comes in, we have the full community. But I do think, we have to have multi-year lookouts. And there is a conversation to be had not that far out then into the future around how do you think about what those next steps are. And so I think my ask would be give us a few more years to prove it in demonstrated ways that go beyond our short horizon. But the pledge here then would be, we'll keep talking about that because there's no conceptual disagreement here on that. It's more of a timing and capacity piece. And you heard exhale even a little bit as you asked it. But that's a good reminder because that was pre-COVID. We talked about that and I haven't been thinking about it.
Another question I had, I just really appreciated the breakdown as I've been thinking more about this, about making sure that our suburban communities step up in terms of the affordable housing too. I guess my question is, do we know the types of housing? Is it just senior housing, or are they doing like multifamily type housing?
Commissioner John, it's a mix. So, in Little Canada, that's 60 units of, affordable housing. 6 of those are at 30% AMI. Those are for anyone on the market. Lauderdale is senior, Mountains View, Maplewood's family-sized, all over the board, Includes supportive units, it includes non-supportive units. By supportive, I mean housing with services, and then housing that are just on the open market for people to rent.
Madam Chair, I just had one thing too, which is, and it was only 5 to 10 years ago that St. Paul was having much of the same conversation we're seeing in some of the communities that Max just mentioned. I think we're on a similar development curve here, which is why we need to keep the conversation going, talk about the value of having a housing mix for all ages and all income levels, right? It feels like we're on a path to that. And what it feels like on both homelessness, which is not today's conversation, but does sit at the most dire end of a housing continuum, and this conversation is we need partnerships across all of our municipal partners. And the more we start to see it as our collective work and not this is the county, this is the city, it makes a huge difference. And I think this program has opened those, we never used to have a way to even have the conversations around programs because we didn't have a program to have anyone applying to, so it's a big deal.
Just on that point too, I'm sure all of us could talk about this, but the change that we've seen in our communities, in my suburban communities, I think they used to be much more worried, who are those people out there, but they're realizing these are our people. I mean, it's the people in the suburbs that need this housing. And so I think we're at that point where we're, like Lauderdale and Little Canada are super excited about this housing that they've got going in. And, and also elections matter, as we know, with the differences of people. Although I would say both of those cities were putting this into place with all of their former councils. But I just am proud of our communities that they're actually, rising to the occasion and really realizing what the community really wants and needs. So thank you for your work in helping all of us get there.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, this team, you talked about transformative work. They are transformative leaders in their work, like just a tremendous team. And really thoughtful and really intentional about how do we do this in different and unique ways. And it takes a lot of work to do transformative work. And so I just want to really commend the team. And because there have been long hours spent and long days, but we appreciate your support in doing this great work because that's what helps keep us on the marathon, right? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so just want to thank you for the support. I know that I have counterparts at other counties who don't feel this collective support, and I and I stress that this is the type of kind of reception that allows us to keep doing the good.
Okay, well, we want to thank you for your presentation today. I wrote down a couple of words because I have to say when we first saw this workshop was happening, I was probably one of the first to call and say, I don't understand this. Why is everything over here? Because I don't have no questions to ask because you made it real clear about what we're doing, why we're doing the partnerships that we have. But some of our words that I wrote down was economic development, you know, the work that we're doing around that, around affordable housing, home ownership, looking at the transit corridor, the critical. And when you create transit, it becomes, a hub for redevelopment, you know, but stories are so important. We have to tell those stories, we have to capture those stories, we have to repeat those stories and share those stories. Because the transformational work that is happening in, Ramsey County is really stabilizing families, and creating opportunities. And so we have become good stewards of the dollars that we have, whether it's local dollars, federal dollars, state dollars. That Ramsey County is doing it, and you guys are making a difference. And so continue to be the visionaries that you are. Let us continue to be the visionaries that we are, and let's keep moving our county forward. So thank you.
Good job.
By the way, everyone in here has to go into the break room and have cake.
There's lots of
Chocolate cherry fudge cake and blueberry yellow cake.
And
For Winona's birthday,